All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to eGestalt's webinar titled HIPAA HITECH Compliance Demystified, How to Navigate the Various Requirements with Implementation Guidelines and Best Practices. Today's presenter is Anupam Sahai, co-founder and president eGestalt. Anupam is an accomplished management, marketing, and technology leader with 21 plus years of experience, directing teams to develop and launch globally renowned products, generating up to $350 million annually. Prior to eGestalt, Anupam was Vice President Marketing for Ixia Inc. He is a recognized expert in the areas of cloud computing, security, networking, and is a featured speaker at several industry conferences worldwide. If you have any questions, please send them via the questions function in GoToWebinar, and we will address them at the end of the presentation. If you'd like a copy of the presentation, please send an email directly to Anupam. His contact information will be given at the end. Thank you, Anupam, for presenting, and I'll turn the webinar over to you now.
Thank you, Mike. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. So my topic is about best practices, requirements, and guidelines for implementation with respect to HIPAA and HITECH compliance. A detailed breakdown of the topics that I'll cover today. I'll start out by talking about HIPAA HITECH requirements and what the implications are for covered entities and business associates. These are medical providers for different medical services. And then I'll talk a little bit about the HIPAA HITECH implications for implementation and the best practices and caveats that we've learned from feedback from our customers. We've also been plugged into the various HHS initiatives with respect to privacy, security, and implementation guidelines, and have been attending the various Tiger team meetings. So a lot of this is based on our interpretation and feedback from customer partners and government agencies. Then I'll talk about automation tools that help address some of the HIPAA HITECH requirements. We've got a topic covering the various tools that are available in this space. And then I'll also talk about the meaningful use requirement for electronic health record implementation. And as of the meeting that took place last week, clearly there are risk assessment related requirements that are needed to demonstrate meaningful use to get the federal grants. And we'll talk a little bit about how do we address those requirements as well, followed by concluding remarks. Before I dive into the details, I just want to make some disclaimers that HIPAA HITECH is an evolving field and the information is subject to change. Some of the implementation guidelines and best practices are still being fleshed out, and so it's subject to interpretation, it's subject to change. And while we've made every effort to ensure that the information presented is correct, clearly we cannot offer any assurances. I would suggest that you consult your auditor or legal attorney for definitive information. So this is subjective information and interpretation of HIPAA HITECH based on our domain expertise. So let me start off by giving a little bit of a background on HIPAA, the genesis of the HIPAA Act, which was in 1996, and HIPAA stands for Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. So the primary objective for enacting HIPAA was really to further the cause of portability and continuity of health insurance coverage, and that objective was to be achieved through a number of different guidelines that were mentioned in the Act. And one of the side effects of this portability and continuity objective was to simplify the administration of the health insurance coverage and health insurance process to ensure and improve the quality of healthcare. HITECH was enacted in 2009. It's another act that allows and provides incentives for implementation of healthcare and IT related practices, and especially related to electronic health record adoption. So there are certain incentives, as in money grants available, and there's certain processes and incentives and other guidelines laid out by HITECH that enables faster adoption of healthcare IT related practices which align with HIPAA. And both HIPAA HITECH, just to provide a broader landscape view, it's not really about technology. It's about improving the quality, safety, efficiency, and the cost of bringing down the cost of healthcare. And this is also about engaging patients and families in the healthcare by involving them in information disclosure, in sharing information, and also improving the care coordination across multiple providers by providing portability of personal records and health records. And doing all of this by ensuring adequate privacy and security protection for what is called PHI, personal health information. So all of this results in better, faster, and cheaper and higher quality healthcare to be provided to consumers. So as far as the HITECH Act is concerned, all covered entities and business associates are required to be compliant with respect to the HITECH requirement. And I'll talk about what the new sort of guidelines that HITECH imposes that is very important to understand and also execute on. So a couple of things that have changed with HITECH. One is the penalties have gone up, and now enforcement is more proactive, more punitive. I'll talk about different tiers of fines that have been imposed, that can be imposed. It can be up to $1.5 million a year, depending on the extent of the violation. Business associates, and I'll define business associates down in a few slides, but anybody who interacts with covered entities or medical providers to deal with PHI, personal health information, are now completely in scope to be affected and implementing HITECH. And not only that, subcontractors or BAs also need to enter into a contract, into an agreement to deal with PHI in an appropriate manner. Security provisions and privacy provisions have been strengthened and clarified, and there are strict guidelines with respect to how information is shared, who is it shared with, and what are the rights of consumers to be part of the process. This is the new penalty system. Depending on the extent of the violation, if it's accidental, it's willful, and if it's willful neglect and not corrected, the fines can stack up to be up to $1.5 million per year. So the fines have gone up substantially, and with respect to the 6 major changes, which we believe are game changers from the HITECH Act perspective, is one is the periodic audits can be done. This can be done by HHS or the state auditor generals, who are now authorized and empowered to bring civil actions on behalf of the citizens. And not only that, the fines when imposed will return to the HHS coffers and could potentially be shared by individuals who are doing the whistleblowing. Business associates, the subcontractors, are contractually obligated, by law obligated to be part of the HITECH implementation process. So not only covered entities, the medical providers, but also the business associates who work with the covered entities to deal with personal health information, electronic health information, are within the purview of the HITECH Act, who need to comply. And then data breach notification requirements, which are essentially a set of requirements to report to HHS regarding any violations that is part of the HITECH Act provisions as well. So what's a covered entity? Let's get some definitions out of the way. A covered entity is could be any medical provider. It could be doctors, clinics, individual practices, small practices included. And as long as they transmit information in electronic form, in codes, or deal with personal health information, personal records, patient records. It could be a health plan, it could be health insurance companies, HMOs, etc., or it could be a clearinghouse entity that processes non-standard health information from one entity to the other. Healthcare exchanges would also be in the purview. Example of business associate. Associate is essentially any entity, any business that involves or deals with personal health information, medical records, etc. So it could be a third-party administrator that assists in claim processing. It could be a hosting entity that's hosting potentially a healthcare information, electronic record information. It could be attorneys, clearinghouse, transcriptionists, etc. And the critical aspect of doing business within the healthcare community is that anybody who has access to PHI is bound by the same regulations and fall under the purview of business associate. So they need to have a business associate agreement in place with the covered entity that they deal with. Now, with respect to the audit requirement, this is the text from the regulation, requires that HHS basically has and can do periodic audits to ensure that the CEs and the BAs are in compliance with HIPAA. And that's part of the requirement that's been fortified as well. So what is covered in the purview of protected health information? What's the definition of PHI? I often get asked this question. So PHI essentially includes, and the definition has been broadened with HITECH. So PHI includes any individually identifiable health information. So it could be anything and everything regarding patients' present, future, or past health conditions. It could be anything that identifies an individual, whether it's name, address, birth date, social security number, and any information that can potentially lead back to identify the individual. So it's a fairly broad requirement. So what does this all mean? I would try to kind of distill all the implementation, all the requirements that we have heard so far into some key set of items here. So from the security perspective, the key requirement is that PHI, personal health information or personal information, must be secured wherever it is stored, whether the information is at rest in physical form or in electronic form, whether it's sitting on the servers, workstations, backup media, fax and copy machines, etc. It needs to be secured, and secured as in not be visible to anybody who's not authorized and authenticated to use it. It should be secured even in transit. So whether you're logging in over the internet to a patient portal, if it's visible, stored locally, and you're providing access to the patient records to the office admin, for example, or if you're mobile, if you're working on a laptop, accessing it remotely, or on a cell phone, all information, all PHI information needs to be secure. From the privacy requirements point of view, there are extended individual rights now, which means that individuals have rights to access the information. They have rights to restrict disclosure of PHI to health plan providers, to third-party marketing agencies, and the basic bottom line guideline is that the individual needs to be in the loop with respect to any disclosure of PHI, and that is explicitly required to be incorporated in the disclosure process. So given all the requirements, so what does this all mean? While we understand that this is all designed to improve the quality of healthcare, improve patient trust in security of PHI, which enables better sharing across multiple providers, what does it mean for the healthcare providers? And what should they be doing to interpret and implement some of excuse me, implement some of the guidelines and requirements? So from the privacy point of view, PHI sharing must be documented and must be for a documented reason and must be done with permission of the individual. So there is a notion of limited data set that should be exposed for sharing, and only the required information should be shared with the people who need to know. And the ability to control who can see and use the personal health information through authentication, which is essentially identifying the right person or the person who needs to know through some authentication mechanisms. And I'll talk a little bit more about on this point as to how to implement some of these requirements, is very critical. And then information needs to be segmented so that only certain types of information is shared with full disclosure rights to the people who need to know. So this brings about new requirements for the healthcare IT infrastructure and processes that need to be put in place to ensure privacy and security issues. So what I'll do next is to kind of take you through some of the best practices. As I said earlier, these are coming in from customer feedback, from Office of National Coordinator IT, Tiger team recommendations, and other feedback that we've gotten from various sources, including our internal expertise. So the first step with respect to implementation guidelines is to start with a self-assessment. Self-assessment essentially is the ability to understand what's the compliance and security status at this point in time. This allows you to focus on the most high priority risk items that are deemed to be that leads to non-compliance. It is also required, as I said earlier, for risk assessment is required for demonstrating EMR meaningful use, which is basically a prelude to getting the federal grants. And then once the self-assessment is done, clearly there needs to be follow-up done to implement a set of processes and tools and maybe a set of guidelines for sharing information, for securing information to plug the gaps. Second best practice is to encrypt the data, encrypt PHI information, personal health information, and also to encrypt information beyond mobile devices and desktops. So USB drives, CDs, DVDs, backup data should be encrypted. And any communication over the internet, whether it's email, social networking, etc., should be discouraged or prevented, especially when it comes to sharing of PHI information. And secure means of communication over the internet for mobile or for laptops, for traveling doctors needs to be ensured that everything is encrypted for any kind of communication. There's a need to have business associate agreements so that partners, consultants, anybody who deals with patient information, it could be hosting providers, shredding companies, for example, they need to have an agreement with the covered entity, with the hospital, with the business, with the medical provider to ensure that the handling of PHI information is being done with utmost care and that they're following the guidelines for HIPAA and HITECH. And if there's any doubt about sharing PHI, we need to make sure that the patient-specific information and approval is in place. So getting agreements with the business associates or getting business associate agreements with the subcontractors, everything should be dealt with and should be done. Use of cloud and SaaS-based services. There have been studies out there with respect to security guidelines, with respect to the breaches that have happened, and studies have shown that cloud providers have spent a lot more resources in securing and providing security infrastructure vis-a-vis a small business provider who may not have the best practices, or the IT staff, for example, or medium-sized companies who may not have the IT staff or the expertise to deal with some breaches like that. So cloud-based providers with best sound practices, which needs to be checked, are deemed to be more secure in many cases, in most of the cases. And that doesn't mean the right due diligence should not be done to check the data security standards to ensure authentication and authorization procedures are being followed, and then having the data archived in the cloud so that you have a copy of all the information, regulatory compliance information, patient record information that can be retrieved on demand to deal with disaster-related issues. Authentication is a theme that comes many times, and authentication really is all about ensuring that the requester of the information is indeed the person that he or she claims to be. So when it comes to accessing patient health records, PHI information, we need to ensure that the person requesting access to information is authenticated. And the recommendation, the best practice recommendation there is to use a two-factor authentication at least, which means that not just having a username password, which is one level of authentication, but also have some other confirmation of the authentication process, in the authentication process. So things like having a biometric data, fingerprint, or having a PIN is what's recommended, so that only the requester who's authenticated is authorized to view the information that they are allowed to. Putting together a social media policy, again, as Facebook and Twitter and other kinds of social media networks are gaining popularity, there have been multiple incidences and fines being imposed on businesses, medical providers who might have accidentally leaked PHI information or patient information casually during chat. So there needs to be a social media policy in place to ensure, and there needs to be a training and a corporate culture in place that essentially educates and trains the staff on what information can be shared, what is out of bounds in social media interactions. Now, dealing with disposal of PHI information, whether it's physical information or electronic information, is very important. So having, for example, a contract or an agreement with a shredding company is important. And again, the idea here is to ensure complete security and privacy of the PHI. And we need to make sure that all trashed PHI is securely destroyed. And that's true with the electronic information as well. So we need to essentially ensure that any electronic information is destroyed. And in fact, there's some recommendations out there with respect to how you destroy the information, and when you destroy it, what should be the fragment size of the destroyed information, etc. But the idea is to make it destroyed so that it cannot be retrieved through reverse engineering. And finally, using data leak protection technologies. Now, this is essentially over and beyond encryption and two-factor authentication. This is a technology used for dealing with accidental disclosure or malicious disclosure of patient information, patient records. So implementing a data leak protection technology that prevents confidential data from being copied to physically removable media such as USB devices, external hard drives, and iPods, and tracking who's accessing what at any point in time is a good way of keeping track of what's happening and what's happening to the data, access, who's authorized to access it, and then which media is being used to look at the information. So data leak technology, data leak protection tools give you complete visibility and control over who accesses what data so that any accidental or malicious disclosure of information can be prevented. So the question is, what does one do? How do businesses get ready for HIPAA HITECH audit? Just to summarize the steps that I talked about earlier. One is to start with a self-assessment, look at what the state of HIPAA HITECH compliance is, and that typically results in a compliance gap analysis and risk analysis report that is essentially a prioritized list of gaps or things that the business needs to do. And then once the business understands which compliance controls or which technical controls are in place or need addressing, there comes the process of ensuring that these can be addressed, these gaps can be addressed. So which means assigning responsibilities in the organization, defining roles, putting policies and procedures in place to deal with security and compliance issues, and then go back and do an assessment to ensure that the steps taken to plug the gaps, to steps taken to remediate the gaps have been effective. And this is essentially an ongoing process of compliance that gives you complete security for dealing with PHI. So some of the background information with respect to what are the other solutions that provide HIPAA HITECH compliance, and the feedback that we get from our channel partners is that there are a few solutions out there, but they're very labor intensive, very manual driven, and quite expensive. And the other question that we get asked is, why should we care? Do we run the risk of getting caught? So the answers are twofold. One is, HIPAA HITECH compliance, which is really around protecting and safeguarding PHI, personal health information, not only protects the most valuable data as a medical business, but also makes you more secure. And secondly, while there's about 600,000 covered entities and millions of BAs, the chances of you getting audited are low, but it's like filing your taxes every year. What are the chances that one might get audited? Their chances are small, but when they come knocking, you want to be ready with all the documentation to deal with any such eventuality. And then, as I mentioned earlier, one of the reasons for doing a self-assessment, risk assessment, is to take advantage of the federal grants for the electronic health record incentives, which require you to do a risk assessment and risk management. So, as you can see in the media, there are lots of incidents that are happening and quite prevalent that get reported. So some of the breaches are quite prevalent, and security breaches of personal health information even for smaller businesses. For example, this report says that in the last 8 to 10 months, between August 2009 and December 2010, about 6 million records were compromised, and these are smaller than 500 people. Larger than 500 people, records compromised were in the same order of breach. So these breaches are beginning to happen quite frequently now, and security hackers are becoming more sophisticated by the day, more organized by the day, And studies have also shown that if you follow best compliance practices such as PCI and HIPAA, you indeed become secure and can take effective safeguards to react and to deal with such attackers and hackers much more proactively. So this says that small data breaches, which is less than 500 employee business companies, there were 9,100 breaches in the first year of reporting. And I talked about the penalties that have been levied now with the HITECH Act, and the HHS office is getting funded by the HIPAA fines that it levies. The fines have gone up, and there are lots of examples of small, medium, and large size business associates or covered entities who are essentially getting breached and potentially facing jail time in some cases if the violations are very high. Now this is what is called the HHS data breach wall of shame. It's essentially a URL that on the HHS side, Health and Human Services side, which lists all the breaches that affect 500 or more individuals. This is part of the breach notification guideline, breach notification rule. And if you look at this URL, you'll find both large and small businesses listed here. So that's about the best practices. The question is, what are the automated tools that can help address some of these requirements and help navigate through the maze of requirements? So let me start by talking about Secure GRC. Secure GRC is a cloud-based SaaS, software as a service solution, and it delivers security and compliance automation for small and medium businesses. And we deliver the solution through what we call managed compliance provider. These are channel partners who work with the end customers and work with eGestalt to deliver a security and compliance solution. Secure GRC comes in two flavors. There is a complete full-blown version of Secure GRC, which is used for audits or launching a full managed compliance service by our channel partners. Secure GRC SB is targeted at small businesses, small practitioners who are looking for a self-assessment and collaboration solution. Let me dive a little bit into Secure GRC SB. So Secure GRC SB takes the HIPAA HITECH Act and regulation and demystifies it by interpreting the requirements as applicable to small businesses, as applicable to CEs and the business associates. It's essentially a web-based assessment that is a list of questions that the customer answers and walks through with adequate help and support documentation. And the result of that process is a risk score and a set of compliance gaps. And then there are a set of library of policies and templates that can be customized to the particular implementation requirement. And it comes with a set of best practices and recommendations library that can also be used for implementing and propagating the best practices within the end customer organization. Channel partners, as I said earlier, we deliver the solution through channel partners only. So channel partners work with end customers to drive the end-to-end process, to provide support for the end-to-end process. And the result of the process is what we call ROC, Report on Compliance, which describes the compliance gaps and a set of remediation set of things that needs to be done to plug in and become secure. I also talked about EMR meaningful use requirements. So there are privacy and security related requirements to demonstrate EHR meaningful use, EMR, electronic medical record meaningful use. And Secure GRC SB helps achieve that risk assessment criteria. So once you walk through the questionnaire, once you walk through the self-assessment, the customers will have a complete view of the compliance gaps and risk gaps, and the high priority risk can be sorted to deal with it. And there are best practices, policies, and procedure docs that can then be compiled to deal with any issues found. So if you look at the life cycle of security and the compliance process, one starts off with doing an assessment, which results in a report. The report has a set of risk analysis as to what are the high priority risks, and then the channel partners work with the customer to come up with a remediation plan. They leverage the policies and procedures and the best practices that are available in the tool to put together a remediation plan which is tailored to the business. And the tool also has built-in BA contracts, other kinds of agreements that are required for the covered entity to put in place with their business associates or subcontractors. And then the business needs to put in place some compliance processes and best practices. Maybe training the employees is required. And then after all this is done, the cycle, one needs to assess the security and compliance status to ensure that everything is in place. If not, they need to be addressed. So Secure GRC out of the box deals with the assessment, self-assessment part of it, and then channel partners work with the customer and leverage the tool, templates, and docs and policies to customize and come up with a remediation plan to plug the gaps and help train the employees, etc. So taking the process a little bit more, I talked about the security and compliance assessment part of it. It's basically a self-guided questionnaire which has adequate help with respect to what the citations and regulations mean. There are best practices and guidance on what does a yes answer to a question mean, so that there's clarity to answer the questions, and there's online help and support available to deal with that. So a questionnaire, as I said, is a yes/no question. It's a list of questions that you ask and answer. And for example, here the help provides guidance on what this means and the implementation best practices that are required to answer those questions. Similarly, there's a self-assessment questionnaire for business associates along with the covered entities with a similar set of questions that need to be answered. And once the questions have been answered, out comes a risk report with the compliance status. The picture is a bit squished, but you basically see the gaps and you see the non-compliant controls that need to be fixed, and how many of them are high risk, medium risk, low risk, so that you can then focus on the high priority items to get that resolved. The risk report that I talked about is something like this. It basically gives a complete picture of which citations, which controls which are non-compliant, and how many of them are higher priority and higher risk, so that you can focus on the most important ones. And then with respect to best practices, assigning roles and responsibility, training, the tool comes with a number of guidelines and policy documents and training documents that can be used by the channel partner to deliver these trainings and customize it for the end customer. And there are best practices available for the channel partner to leverage as they work with the customer. And there are lots of online help, videos, etc. available to support the end customer and the channel partner. And then after all this is done, you want to go back and evaluate your status, and hopefully all of them look green, so that you're secure and compliant, and then there is a need to continuously ensure that those are addressed. And the channel partner would also generate a ROC, report on compliance, which will describe what the latest status is, what needs to be put in place to remediate and plug the gaps. So In summary, the key requirements to be on top of HIPAA HITECH and EHR meaningful use requirements is to understand where you stand with respect to HIPAA security and compliance, understand and assess that, plan for plugging the gaps and securing the data, and then, God forbid, if there's a data breach that still happens, you want to make sure that you have a response plan in place with the right forms and to the right entities, and then assign roles and responsibilities in your organization to ensure that the compliance issues are addressed. With respect to closing remarks, Secure GRC SB that I talked about has end-to-end security and compliance management solution built into it. We work with the channel partners who help with parts of the process with respect to remediation and customizing the policy and the best practices that are available in the tool because one size does not fit all, and channel partners work with us. We work on training them and work with the customer to ensure that they can provide a customized solution to the HIPAA HITECH related implementation issues. And one thing that I want to emphasize is that HIPAA compliance is a journey. It's an ongoing process. It's not a once in a year kind of a event. Certainly it helps if you are compliant, but it's an ongoing process in terms of training procedures, in terms of educating employees, and it's also about security. So compliance, HIPAA HITECH compliance leads to better security, which means better security practices, using better tools, and just having a better awareness with respect to how to protect patient health information records. And please get in touch with us if you're interested. If you are an IT service provider, if you're interested in offering this, please get in touch with me after the call or go to our website to get further information. Some references, as I said earlier, this is, clearly this information is evolving and changing by the day, by the week. And what we have presented here is essentially what we have in the tool based on input and feedback from various sources, and would love to hear your feedback. With that, we'll open it up for questions. Mike?
Great, thank you, Anupam, for presenting. If you have any questions, go ahead and ask your question in the questions area of GoToWebinar, and we'll get them answered. Anupam, we have our first question. How is the SB requirements different from larger providers?
Okay, so SB, I mean you mean small businesses. Yeah, so small business requirements are slightly different from the larger business requirements, as in the scale brings about certain shortcuts that small businesses might be able to take. So, for example, in larger businesses, you might have a DMZ, a demilitarized zone in your firewalls, and the scale requires a different set of security practices, for example. So with respect to demystifying HIPAA HITECH and making it applicable to small businesses, Secure GRC SB kind of distills the requirements and its implementation guidelines as applicable to small businesses, so that you don't need to implement everything if it's not applicable to you as a small business. So there are certain implementation shortcuts, in a nutshell. There are certain implementation shortcuts that you can take, and if you're a small business versus a full, larger entity where you might have to implement the full HIPAA HITECH guidelines in its full glory.
Okay, thanks, Anupam. Next question.
If you want more details, please. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, your contact information is right there on the slide. I'm guessing you're going to tell them they can contact you for more details.
Yeah,
correct? Okay.
Exactly.
Next question, how does the red flag policy fit in with this?
Yeah, so what I can do is I can kind of take it offline with you and discuss it in some more detail. I'll have to bring in another expert to kind of dwell on that.
All right. Next question, why is Secure GRC SB unique?
So as I mentioned earlier, we have basically taken the HIPAA HITECH guidelines and distilled it to cull out the relevant parts for making it applicable to businesses. And it's a very simple, cost-effective, cloud-based tool. It's a web-based tool that allows you to understand the requirements and implement the security and compliance requirements for small businesses. So we believe we are unique in that the cost point, the cost price point, and the end-to-end solution that we provide is unique in the market today.
Okay, thank you, Anupam. We have time for one more question. What happens when I don't have a required policy or best practices document?
Yeah, so one of the things that I mentioned earlier with SP is that we've got the best practices and recommendation library. We also have a complete library of policies and templates that are required for HIPAA HITECH implementation. So if you don't have a policy and template, then the tool comes with some templates of policies and templates that can be customized to your specific needs. So as you go through a self-assessment, a risk assessment, and it's found that you need certain processes or policies to be put in place, you can leverage the tool and work with the channel partner to get those documents in place, and they can customize it for you.
Okay, thank you, Anupam. Thanks again, Anupam, for presenting today, and thank you to all the attendees for attending. We're going to have a copy of this presentation, actually a recording of the webinar, up on eGestalt's website at www.egestalt.com. There were a couple of questions we couldn't get to, but Anupam's going to respond to those offline, and the recording of the webinar should be up within the next day. So thank you, attendees, and thank you, Anupam, for presenting today.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you all for coming.